I'll go ahead and call the August 15th Red Rock Corridor Commission meeting to order. And please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. We are waiting on one member for quorum, so we were going to go to the discussion portion of the agenda, which is number 5 for those watching at home, and that is Red Rock Vision Refresh, Update, and Discussion. And for that, we will turn it to Will Schroeer from East Metro, and he can introduce also the next guest as well.
Very good.
Is that Raphael? Actually, Will, we're going to have you hold 1 second.
Sure.
Here comes Raphael.
Oh, here's Raphael. Perfect. Right. Okay.
Hiya. We're going to quick do acknowledgement that we have roll call. So if Andrea would quick do roll call for us.
Yes.
Or I suppose I could do introductions. Would that be easier for you?
You can do that.
Okay,
yes,
we'll do
thank you.
introductions. Commissioner Ortega, do you want to start?
Rafael Ortega, Ramsey County Commissioner.
Arvin Taylor, City of Newport.
Tony Cambada, Cottage Grove City Council.
Carla Bigham, Washington County Commissioner.
Sandy Dingle, Mayor of St. Paul Park.
Dave Pemble, City of Hastings.
Awesome. Please let the record show that we do have quorum. Go ahead, Will.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you all commissioners for having us here. My name's Will Schroeer. I'm the Executive Director of East Metro Strong. Been in front of you a couple of times. And let's see, Christof, what do I, sorry?
It was working and then
was.
suddenly stopped working.
And actually, while you guys do that, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve today's agenda.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved by Mayor Dingle, seconded by Council Member Pemble. Any discussion?
Nope. that goes
Seeing
away.
none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That is approved. And then while we're still working on technology, we will go ahead and approve, look for a motion to approve the May minutes.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Commissioner Ortega, seconded by Councilmember Pemble. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. We're just waiting for a second for some brief technology issues.
Are you sending it to me?
I will give it to you on phone drive.
Okay. Well, that won't work on the county computer, but
Oh, well, should I send it?
we can maybe put it onto this computer.
Okay.
Sorry, folks. We plugged it in, it came up, we thought it was all good, but it won't stay up.
Okay.
The county doesn't allow external thumb drives unless they've been cleared by our IT.
Is there another way to get it to you?
We could try putting it onto this computer.
Okay, let's try that. Yes,
Did you put it on a thumb drive?
He did.
yes,
We can try to see if it will.
but we're trying it now here. Ah. Try scan, whatever. There we go.
Oh. One moment.
Maybe I just need to turn this screen.
Oh, there it
Look
goes.
at that. All right. Let's see if it stays up.
It works.
Okay,
No, you're okay.
we're okay.
Okay.
There we go.
You just needed to stand up for your desk. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, folks, for your patience. I'm going to give a very short update on our engagement, and then the star of the show is Christof Spieler from Huitt-Zollars, and he's here with his colleague, Alyssa Zimmer. We've been spending a lot of time looking at the corridor, and we're here to share with you some thoughts about what we've seen. We have developed an online survey and are distributing it to a variety of folks living and working in the corridor. And Andrea is going to include this in your meeting report and encourage you to share it with folks. We're getting some really interesting results on the online survey. And we're also doing in-person engagement. We were at Party in the Park in July in Hastings, lovely event, and had quite a few people come past the table, and literally everybody said they were in favor of more transit in this corridor, of any transit in this corridor. And even the folks that said they wouldn't necessarily use it, they saw the point of it, which is not a reaction that you get everywhere in the region. So you've got an enlightened group of residents from my perspective. This morning we met with Renewal by Anderson and had a really interesting conversation with their management. They are growing, as you well know, and they are having trouble recruiting, and their applicants tell them, I can't work for you because there's no transit to your plant. So a very explicit recognition of the need there. And in addition to their growth and some of their constraints in getting workers, they pointed us to all the folks who are also building in the industrial park, and those needs are only going to increase. So a lot of useful information from that meeting this morning. We're scheduling more meetings with more folks, and we'll look forward to sharing those details with you when we get them. I want to share just a couple of responses from the online surveys with you. I'm not going to read them all. You will get this in your meeting report and can absorb them on your own time. But I'm struck by how the respondents really conveyed the breadth of the needs in this corridor. It's not only the commute trip, although people identify the commute trip, and I would just point out both directions. We had folks living in Minneapolis saying, I'm coming here, I need help, and people who live here going to Minneapolis saying, that's a hard trip to make, I could use some transit. And then I just really appreciated somebody saying, and so the first question in the survey is very broad. Don't tell us about transit, tell us about your transportation needs generally. Where can you not go that you need to go? And someone said, I need to visit the family cemetery, and I can't get there. And I thought that was just a really useful reminder to us that the transportation needs are not only about work or even going to the doctor, they are comprehensive about a full life. Then we got to the more transit-oriented questions and, asked people, okay, if we provided transit in this corridor, would you use it? And again, a lot of enthusiastic yes, both for themselves, but also some acknowledgement that it might not work for them, but healthcare patients necessary for them, and then some outlining of yes, but only if it's direct. So again, a very useful and I thought insightful set of contributions. And then finally, just some recognition that road congestion is a factor here as well. It's not that people want to put more lanes on 61, but even if you did, there's just not room. And of course, I think you have observed in the past, the new bridge is not going to be expanded. So that's really a bottleneck. And so as growth continues to come to this corridor, we're going to have transit. We just are. So with that very quick update on the outreach, I want to turn it over to Christof Spieler. We've had Christof work in this region a couple of times before, and folks always find his work thoughtful and insightful, and I'm pleased to say that we have a couple of projects now under construction in St. Paul that he suggested. And so it's always lovely to see a recommendation come to fruition, and I hope that we'll be able to say the same here. But without further ado, Christof Spieler. Thanks.
Very happy to be here and happy to be with a room of people who are trying to make better transit happen and help you think through that. So we just spent yesterday touring the corridor. I've taken a look at some of the data we have on population density, employment density, taken a look at some of the travel patterns we see from the census. And I've done transit work across the country. I wrote a book which covers every rail and BRT system in the United States. So I've definitely been to other corridors with similar kinds of land use and similar kinds of travel patterns. But I will note that traveling around, I think there are some things which are very unique about this corridor that I think are important to understand, and that might lead us to some possibilities as to what the future of transit in the Red Rock corridor could be. I'll start by saying there is a very clear need for transit in this corridor. Up and down the corridor, you see people, you see senior housing, you see new apartment complexes, you see businesses, you see employers. People want to travel between these things. People want this corridor to be part of the overall transit system in the Twin Cities. And right now it isn't. Right now you can dial Metro Access, but other than that, you basically do not have any transit options in this corridor. But there's also a series of very specific challenges that I see here. The first is a single BRT rail or rail corridor by itself will not meet the transit needs in this corridor. There's no line we can draw, no set of stations we can draw that are going to serve all of the places that have transit demand. And unlike some other corridors, like the Gold Line, which had an underlying network of local bus service it could connect to, that network doesn't exist here. Secondly, when we look at travel patterns in this corridor, we find that they really go to a lot of different destinations. This is census commute data, and what this is asking is, where do residents of these cities, Hastings, Cottage Grove, St. Paul Park, Newport, actually work? And what you will notice here is that, yes, you will see downtown St. Paul pop here, and you will see downtown Minneapolis pop, but notice how many other places we're seeing people going to. We're seeing people go over towards Egan, Dakota County. We're seeing people go up to Woodbury. And we're also seeing a lot of travel within the corridor. And I think one thing I've seen across the United States is a lot of transit planning is very narrowly focused. A lot of times we assume all jobs are white-collar jobs in downtown high-rises. But that's not the majority of jobs. There's a lot of service jobs, and you see them up and down this corridor, and people are traveling at all different times of day, and of course, only about a quarter of the trips we make are actually home to work trips. So there's a lot of demand in this corridor, but it isn't all in a neat straight line to one place. The other thing traveling up and down the corridor is it's notable the degree to which the highway and the railroad next to it create a huge barrier, which means that even if you get a station near people, many people will not be able to walk to that station. One of our conventional rules of thumb in transit planning is that a walkable radius is something like a 5-minute walk or a quarter mile. You look at that pedestrian bridge up there, it's a quarter mile from one end of the bridge to the other. You've done your entire walking distance just trying to cross that railroad and cross that highway. So a line which on the map looks like it serves a lot of places actually doesn't serve nearly as many places as you think because of these barriers that are literally in people's way trying to get to where they want to go. We also have land use patterns that really don't work well for transit. We have a lot of transit demand, but it tends to be spread out. What transit does really well is it serves places that are in a straight line. And you look around and you see a lot of those big employers are actually surrounded by farm fields, scattered around near each other, but not arranged in a neat, tidy pattern. That definitely makes it a lot more difficult to figure out how to make transit work here. And the real upshot of all of those is if we try to draw one transit route to serve this corridor, it actually results in few people being served well. I think here we have a beautiful example of that in Newport. This is a transit center that has real destinations next to it. You've got those apartments next door. People want to go here. So this is a destination. You want to serve it. But on the other hand, if you look at the configuration of the highway ramps, the configuration of the roads, to get a bus in and out of here adds 5 minutes or more to the travel time of that bus. So you have a choice. Do we have a bus route which serves the people who live right here? If we do that, then we are adding travel time to everyone else traveling through the corridor. Or on the flip side, do we skip it so everybody else has a faster trip and then the people in these apartments aren't served? You do that trade-off over and over again along the length of the corridor, and you start to run into what your problem is. And so that's why drawing one route down this corridor really doesn't serve all of these different travel needs that we've seen. So the conclusion, I'd say, is that we need a network. This isn't about trying to draw one line. It's about thinking about what a transit network looks like that serves this corridor well. And to do that, we really start having to think about what kind of tools we have here. We can talk about some kind of express bus service. Almost certainly, that means it requires some new infrastructure. The express bus service in this corridor has always tried to use the existing highway infrastructure. The on and off ramps are often not well situated for those transit centers. There are things we can build to make that service work a lot better. And so a very real possible tool here is some kind of a limited stop express bus service, be it BRT or more conventional express bus. A second tool is local bus. The bus that drives down the street, stops every couple of blocks, serves everyone who's along that street. We also now have microtransit, something like Metro Micro that the Met Council is working on, where it's actually an on-demand service where you use your app and you say, I want to ride, and within 20 minutes you get picked up and that service can take you wherever you want to go. That service could be feeding one of these other services. That service might take you to the transit center where you connect to that express bus that takes you somewhere else. The real advantage of that is you don't have to draw the line on the map. Anybody within that zone gets service, because that bus comes to them rather than you having to try to predict in advance where that goes. It's interesting, those services often carry a lot of very short trips, as people are using them to do things like go to the grocery store, which they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. We could think about employer shuttles. Some of the major employers in the corridor could absolutely run a shuttle to a major transit center where they can then connect to that other transit service. Or we can even do something called deviated fixed route, where we have a bus that generally follows its route, but if you use an app or if you call up, that bus will actually go out of its way to pick you up. So a good way to serve, again, destinations which can be spread out, that are sort of along a general corridor, but not all on a straight line from each other. So when we think about these kind of tools, we can start to put them together and build a network. But every one of those ends up being a series of trade-offs. For example, one of the things people care about in transit is how often does my bus run? There's a difference between a bus that runs 4 times a day, or every hour, every 30 minutes, or every 15 minutes. However, given a certain amount of transit funding, the more frequently you want to run your routes, the fewer routes you can have. A route that runs every 15 minutes takes 4 times as many buses as a route that runs every hour. So you have a choice between 4 routes that run once an hour or 1 route that runs every 15 minutes. So you have to decide what's more important to you. And that's also true for simplicity. It's a lot easier to understand a network if you have fewer routes, if those routes have fewer variations to them. But then again, you're going to cover less ground with that network. So how important is it to make a network that's easy to understand? And speed. It's what I mentioned earlier. Every time you want a bus to make a stop, and especially you want a bus to go out of its way to make a stop, you're adding travel time to that bus. You're serving more people, but you're giving everybody a slower trip. All of these trade-offs are built into all transit planning. And like I said, I think there's things about this corridor which really foreground those and are particularly true here. And we need to think about what kind of role does transit play? Are we trying to replace car trips? Are we trying to get people out of their cars and onto transit? That's something that the Park and Ride Express buses, for example, are very much targeted to do. The people riding those buses, they have a car, they could be driving to work. We want them on a bus instead, therefore we provide that service. Or are we trying to serve riders who don't have a car or have limited car access? You know, one of the things we've heard from employers, for example, is they have people who don't have a car who'd like to come work there and can't work there because they don't have transit. Or we've got senior citizens who would like to be able to go to the grocery store, who'd like to be able to go to the clinic. They don't have a car. They want some kind of transit service. Are we trying to support new land use patterns? Is this transit part of a greater planning strategy for what the cities along the corridor look like? Are we trying to connect new workforce to employers? Are we trying to support this employment growth by making sure those employers have access to a larger pool of potential employees? Really thinking about what role transit plays here, I think is really important, because if you have these kind of goals, you're going to design very different networks. And overall, that leads to a set of travel patterns. You know, people who live in this corridor, what are we trying to connect them to? Are we trying to get them to jobs in St. Paul? Are we trying to get to jobs in other cities in the corridor? Are we trying to get to Woodbury? Are we trying to get to Dakota County? Are we trying to connect residents to grocery medical care instead of jobs? And what about people in St. Paul? Are we trying to connect in that direction? Are we trying to create a connection from Hastings to the Twin Cities? What kind of trips are we trying to serve here, and what kind of connections are we trying to create? And on a map, all of these could show up as parts of the same line, but they're different travel markets, and we have to understand what we're actually trying to do here. So given that, we started sketching around and thinking about, like, what could this be? And I don't want you to take any of what I'm about to put up here as these are the proposals. I think it's a useful exercise to think about the fact that transit service in this corridor could actually take a lot of forms. And which forms are best really depend on what our goals are, and really depend on what we're trying to serve, and depend on what level of investment we want to make. And I think most of the previous planning in this corridor is focused on the idea of, like I said, a single line, that basically you build some kind of fixed guideway, started out thinking about rail, moved to BRT, but basically think about, here is a line with a series of stations along it that fundamentally has a single service on it, that every bus or every train makes the same set of stops along that corridor. Say we start with that, but we might start to think about, given what we just saw about travel patterns, is this the way we want to connect? Or, you know, for example, do we want to think about feeding this in a different way? What if we don't just do that one express service, but feed into it with a series of microtransit zones, so that everybody who isn't directly next to one of those stations can call that on-demand service, be fed into the station, and vice versa. If you're coming from St. Paul and you're working at Renewal by Anderson, you can get off at that Cottage Grove station and get on one of those on-demand services that'll bring you to the front door of your job. This really starts to serve a lot more trips than just that corridor by itself. Putting those two pieces together really starts to create a network. But we can also ask, where should that red line go? For example, if you look at where the demand is in St. Paul, maybe it makes sense, instead of feeding into Union Depot, we feed up into Sunray, so that you get those 3M jobs, you get that connection to Woodbury, and you get a connection to a lot of local bus routes up there. Or maybe we shouldn't just be thinking about one line. We saw that Dakota County demand. What if we say there's actually two routes we're talking about here, and one of those routes might be a route that goes from Hastings Cottage Grove, Newport, West St. Paul, Eagan, Mall of America. Connect to a lot of jobs over in that area, connect to a lot of residents over that area, connect to a lot of other transit routes. And maybe the other one goes to the end of the Gold Line. And so that if you're sitting in Cottage Grove, you have a choice of what destination you're going to head to. Or really, maybe there's 3 of those, because I think there is a distinct demand stream that heads towards downtown St. Paul. So maybe we're really talking about 3 routes. And then you're bringing them together at these hubs where you get a choice of where you're going to go. So compared to the original alternative, this might be a lower level of infrastructure. You're probably not going to build a full busway along all of these, but you're actually connecting people to a lot more places. Or maybe the line I just drew could be 2 lines. Maybe we decide that sort of Newport is the hub of this, and we feed an east-west route and a north-south route together, make sure those transfers time out, make sure people can make those connections. Now, when I draw this isn't saying we shouldn't build any infrastructure, because the way Newport, the freeway lamps are laid out right now, this would actually be very difficult to operate with current infrastructure. But what you could do is add some ramps, add some direct bus flyovers, so that you get good connections into that transit center, and those then enable the entire system. Well, I mean, we don't necessarily have to do on demand either. We could imagine something where you have these freeway express routes, but then they leave the freeway and become local routes. So that route might exit the freeway in Cottage Grove and then actually serve those destinations. The Hastings route might serve those. And if you did that, you could think about having a hub somewhere along the line where all of those connect. You could imagine 3 different buses all come in at the same time, and coming in from Woodbury, coming in from St. Paul, coming in from all of America, and they're all going to 3 different places, and everybody can get out and switch buses at that point, so that you go on whatever bus is going to end up in the place you're trying to go to, which means you can also move back and forth within the corridor. And at some point, you might start to think about Hastings in particular. Is the transit demand in Hastings really along the Red Rock corridor, or is the connection to the rest of Dakota County more important? You might start to think about different sets of connections, or maybe we answer that we actually need both of those. Again, if we're planning buses, we're not constrained by where the rail line goes. We can think about other options. And we might consider other technologies as well. Like I mentioned, we've got deviated fixed route. You could imagine a bus that operates as a freeway express bus all the way from St. Paul or Woodbury, but then when it exits the freeway, becomes a deviated fixed route where it will take you to any destination along the way, so that you could get picked up at your door anywhere in Cottage Grove, stay on that vehicle, and get a direct ride directly into St. Paul, for example. And so if you think about all of these, every one of these possibilities serves some kinds of trips well and others not as well. Every one of them applies a different set of infrastructure. Every one of them has different implications for land use patterns and where it might make sense to do more development. What I will say I'm convinced of looking at this so far is that thinking of this as a network really helps. That if we don't think there's one line that solves all of our problems, but rather think of multiple services that go together, I think this corridor is really well suited to that. There's a lot of differences between, say, Red Rock and the Gold Line in terms of what land use patterns look like and what travel patterns look like. I will say for all of these, first of all, it's important to realize we've got some tools already available. We already have on-demand dial-a-ride across the corridor. And I think it's probably worth doing some work to make sure the public and employers know about those, know the transit options that exist. And I also want to really highlight employers are a really big part of this, as I think a lot of the travel demand here is the fact that this corridor is becoming a major employment hub, particularly for these manufacturing jobs. And people are not going to take those jobs unless they know the transit exists. So when they're talking to an HR person about taking a new job, we want that HR person to be telling them about the transit. They are not going to take these unless the employers have work policies that support them well. And I think, so we really want employers to be promoting transit to their employees, so we get enough ridership on that transit. And I think in a lot of cases, employers could financially support these services or even operate some of them themselves. So this is the kind of thing where an organization like a TMA could help build up this demand over time, which then makes the bigger transit investments a lot easier.
If you're done with your presentation, I
What?
have a burning question, but only. If you're
Okay,
done
well,
with your
I'm actually
presentation.
almost done. Namely, here's my question slide.
Councilmember Kamada.
I know, as a matter of fact, Anderson Windows has a parking problem.
Yes.
So I think they would be a strong proponent of encouraging the use of alternative forms of transit. So I think, as you had said, having a partnership where the employers are, advocates for the alternative forms of transit would be helpful because I mean, like the dial-a-ride, I know it exists, but like it's not top of mind when I'm thinking of getting somewhere, like, hey, maybe I don't have to drive,
Right.
So I think just making sure that that's top of mind for people would be helpful.
Yeah, and there's real expertise in that kind of transportation management, making sure the employers either have it in-house or have access to it.
And then I just want to offer that if any of the cities want to, have staff or whatever, any information we can provide to your community development, economic development folks that we can to provide to employers in your town, let us know. I mean, I'm happy to meet with any employers with our staff too. A couple things.
Yes.
I was super excited to see the variety of options because that's long-term what I have always envisioned. One of the top criticisms I hear of this area for lack of transit is east-west. Because we don't have access to an airport, public transit, we don't have access to Mall of America, we don't have access going across to Wakota that way. And it was built, and God bless her, Myra Peterson, who's my predecessor, that was why we built it. Raphael, I mean, you know that as well. And so it was to have that transit option, and it's already nearly at capacity, and it's not that old. So I like that idea. I like what you've done as far as breaking it up, that maybe in the Sunray thing, having a stop at Sunray, maybe having the Newport option going out to the west. I mean, I think there's just the sky's the limit in some of those things. I will always say that the Red Rock Corridor needs to complement Gold Line because they both will help with ridership on both lines, and they are going to drive workforce. They are going to have around each of these sites would have housing. So I see them both as a complement to each other. And I really like the idea of kind of the multi-tier different options. And I know that from a county perspective, the legislature gave us a lot of money this year. When fully phased in, it's a lot of money, but that phase in is a phase. It's a little bit out. But regardless, it is a significant increase in money. And I do think that the ability to start planning for this and working with our local communities is a huge opportunity. And I'm excited for it. I know from Washington County's perspective, looking at the microtransit, the dial-a-rides, and how we can partner and expand on those. We've had discussions with each of in my communities, I have very close relationships with my mayors and talking with each of them about transit and how we can, now that we're kind of going to have a lot more money for transit in I call it intra-county or microtransit. That's a big deal, whether it's Stillwater, Forest Lake, Woodbury. We're one big happy county and we want to get around. And we know that our residents want to go to Woodbury for variety of needs. They want to go to Stillwater for variety of needs, Forest Lake for variety of needs. So we want to make that happen. So all this plays into that. Other comments?
I think what I've seen here so far is very interesting from the perspective of Hastings in particular. The bridge you see right there, we're talking the low 30,000s every day of vehicle traffic going across there.
Yeah.
And when Dakota County finishes the county road extension from Rosemont to Hastings and makes that 4-lane, that will be a straight county end to county end throughway. Right now, there's 12,000 some vehicles accessing that every day. The projections from the Department of Transportation, once that's done, they're looking at maybe somewhere between double and triple the number, and they're gonna go across that bridge, 90% of them.
Yeah.
And it takes time now. If you wanna get across the bridge from, like, say, 1 or 2 in the afternoon till after the supper hour, that's a bottleneck.
Yeah.
But people are coming that way and people are going northbound. There's only gonna be a bigger issue. And now I'm looking at it from the perspective of the redevelopment of the Highway 61 roadway through our community. That's making even bigger impacts on this bottleneck. And so anything that comes along, in mass transit or some kind of transit that can relieve the numbers of vehicles going northbound or coming southbound that have one individual in them, that has to help.
Got it.
And so that's to us, it's like, and how soon and what kind of dollars does it take, and how do we turn the discussion and say, okay, everybody you talk to, they want to drive.
Yeah.
Well, I'm one that I'd ride. You get to a certain time in your life and you say,
Yeah.
I'm not interested in driving. But there's got to be improvements, and I think this is one option that we're looking at here, what you've just mentioned. We need to move forward with these kinds of things and get more information out to folks. That's, to me, the biggest issue here is educating the public on the access and the needs for change in transit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I'll say that I think when we think about transit, we often think about building stuff, but financially, the hard part is actually operating stuff. And that's where having a new tax revenue source that can actually pay for operations is a big deal. And I think there's real opportunity here to phase things, to think about, we start with one route, we start with some level of service, we keep building that up. We start by running the service and then build up more infrastructure with it. Because that way people start to see something. First of all, you're making people's lives better right away, which to me is what transit is about. You want to make people's lives better. But secondly, you start to see it work and you build the support for doing more and more of it. And that feels to me like a real opportunity. What is phase 1? What is phase 2? What is phase 3?
Any other comments?
I was just gonna say, it was interesting as you're going through, would you like, we could do this? Would that work? Yes. Or we could do this, yes. And I'm like, not or, yes, and yes, and yes. I mean, like, some great ideas in there. And, taking it over to the Mall of America was something that really stuck out to me because that's a transit hub in itself. That once you get there, you can go in so many different directions too, and including the airport very quickly with the train. Something that I really hadn't considered when I thought about, BRT and Red Rock Corridor and everything else, that could ever connect over to the Mall of America. But Carl is exactly right. It's been such an east-west deal for so long, and we need to think outside that box in order to get more people ramped up on transit. And what better way than to take it in those other directions to some really good hot spots that they can also travel from. you know, the Mall of America's transit hub is wonderful, and you can go
Yeah.
a lot of different places from that area. So you can, my husband goes and parks and then goes to the Twins game from the Mall of America. He hops on the train and then goes up into Minneapolis, because he doesn't want to go park in Minneapolis and figure it out. So, you know, there's just so much you can do, but.
Absolutely.
I like the east-west and the north-south proposal. Again, to echo what Sandy Dingle said, every time you go east-west, whether it's Highway 62 or Highway 494, it's congested at any point in the day, on any day of the week. And I wonder how many of those trips are coming from the Southeast Metro. Because looking at the use pattern, you know, a lot of people from here are going to the west and northwest suburbs via those corridors. So I think that alleviates some of that traffic pattern as well, or has the potential to.
Do
I
you
guess,
think, Marv?
I'm in Newport where a lot of challenges, all this kind of east, west, north, south kind of crosses. I mean, I'm just, we're going to be putting in another apartment, or council will be approving that next couple days here, pretty much certainly by the transit site. But I mean, I'm just like, realistically, is there things that we need to be thinking about, configure, before we overbuild, to make that key, or keep that possibility alive with the current layout. We know, I mean, there's challenges with it and access issues, but I mean, that would be the helpful thing for me is like, okay, we shouldn't develop this parcel, or we need to think about, because the last thing you want to do is throw something in a spot, then that eliminates that, it's there's only so much land in that area, and it's developing, pretty rapidly. Even we have 140 unit one coming in September too. That's a short distance away. So as these pieces come into place, I just kind of make sure we don't screw something up that blocks it, I guess, is my.
Yeah. No, I agree. And that's something we'll absolutely be looking at is if there are pieces of infrastructure that are needed there, where might those go? So that, like you said, the city can make decisions based on that. I love that apartment development. I think part of what will make transit successful here is ultimately the best way to get transit ridership is have places people can walk to or from the transit. And obviously that's something the microtransit helps with, but every place where you have those express buses stopping, you want stuff around that, because that's going to get you ridership, and it is going to be so useful for the people living there by simply making that transit more useful to more people. So I was very happy to see we've got a transit hub here that actually has new development next to it.
One thought that I had too was, is there a possibility of moving the transit hub in Cottage Grove closer to the industrial park? Because they're also looking at, 650 units of apartments going in that area? I just saw a comp plan amendment for that.
In addition to potentially 2,000 jobs.
Yes,
So-
but not everybody that lives in those apartments is gonna work right there.
Right.
They're gonna wanna go other areas too, or maybe one spouse works there and the other spouse wants to be able to travel to St. Paul or over to Woodbury or wherever. And I'm just, we keep talking about, but how do we get that last mile from the transit hub over to that industrial park, over to where potentially there's all those apartment buildings, that sort of thing? Does it make sense maybe that we look at moving that transit hub closer to the industrial park? I don't know.
Yeah, or
I'm just gonna throw that out there.
I really do feel we'll have a circulator service with as huge as that industrial park is. I would.
That's a
I
great
think there'd be shuttles of some
Yeah,
sort.
I think, each one of those, as I've gone to the groundbreaking and such, they've asked about that, so.
Okay.
And our transit hub is a park and ride. It's not walkable to anything.
Yeah.
It's landlocked.
Yeah.
It's on the opposite side of the highway from where it should be.
Yes.
Even if you put a pedestrian bridge right across the highway, to his point, that's still an 8 mile walk just to get anywhere. So yeah, I think when that was put there, I think it was single purpose. It was meant to catch an express bus to St. Paul. No one was walking to that place. It's just a parking lot. So I think maybe more so than that would maybe be, to have local buses collecting there, and still, otherwise I don't see how that hub is going to serve anyone outside of park and ride express riders.
And that may not be the right location for it. Like if I look at the activity, may make more sense to say we want a hub that's next to the grocery stores and the retail because that already is a destination. So, I think there's definitely opportunities along the corridor to build these hubs in new places.
Anything, Commissioner Ortega?
Well, first of all, there comes a certain point where I'll be doing more listing, because I don't live in the area.
Yeah.
I live in downtown St. Paul. But, in Ramsey County, the county is probably the biggest landowner of green space, okay? And so, as we close one of our golf courses and we put it up for development, we're looking at different development proposals coming forward. And we just had a workshop last week, and I guess what concerns me is these developments are now building houses with 3-car garages and so forth. I asked a question, and this is a major, it spills into Century Avenue. The bus, even the bus line there is not adequate for the number of developments. And how many cars are gonna go into the road if you build 100 units, each with 3-car garages? That's 300 cars, right? So I guess as you move forward, even with the land use, that I know it's hard when when you want to develop your land, but are we doing the transit planning necessary before we even say all right to a developer? Are we really doing ourselves in long term? Because I can think of 2 projects in the city, within the city of St. Paul, that are gonna have problems. They're so big, they're huge.
I think one of the challenges there is what you master plan for versus what infill development actually happens. And if the
Yeah.
infill development is denser than what the master plan was for that roadway, then you face the challenges that you're facing.
Yeah.
And we also face, we're
Right,
a 2-lane
right.
road that was adequate for a very long time is
No longer.
no longer adequate, and now
So
there's
you
nowhere
gotta
else to.
get- Yeah,
to-
my point is
to
you either
grow.
gotta get Met Transit into the planning early, or, because every developer says, we're gonna do a transit plan, don't worry about it. Well, that's a bunch of bull. Your transit plan always comes out saying, it can handle it, it's adequate.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking out loud. I have no, it's just my observations and what we're doing with the land as we put it up for sale and we get these proposals. I mean, these are enormous developments now. How many did you say, 300 in the one you're talking about?
Over 600.
600?
Yeah, and I mean, that's in addition to, we've added rough numbers, 400 apartment units in the last 18 months that have been greenlit. They're not done yet, but that are going to be under construction. So, that coupled with another 600. Woodbury's been at, I think 1,000 or 1,100 dwelling units per year average. Cottage Grove's been about 500, so Cottage Grove and Woodbury alone, we're adding approximately 1,500 dwelling units per year for the last 4 years.
That's a Newport a year almost.
Yeah,
Well, and just one last thought, and I do have to leave at 5, I have another appointment, but when you take Century, they have good bus service. I mean, their bus service is good. But it's, to your point, it's a very linear, traditional type of bus. And the workforce is now no longer 9 to 5.
Yes.
So there are a lot of, I'm just thinking out loud that as you move forward, even with the land use, it's not just they don't stand alone anymore.
No, and I like your point about even the details of development patterns matter. Like one of the things I've run into in other places is new employers built this big campus. Their employee entrance is a 1/4 mile from the street. if a bus stops on the street, it's a really long walk to that. So even like the little details of how developments are laid out, these cul-de-sac developments, sometimes adding a couple of additional pedestrian paths so people can get to that bus stop more directly can make a huge difference. So I do think like in that sort of permitting, entitlement, development planning process, there's opportunities there to make sure things are built in a way that's somewhat more transit friendly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm excited about a lot of it, and I think there's a lot of good feedback. So what are the, and Andrea, this might be more for you too, but what's the next steps then from this feedback? Now you're gonna be talking to businesses, getting feedback from the cities. Maybe Will, if you wanna come up and say what the next steps are. And I know you'll be back in October, but let us know what the next steps are here.
Sure. So thanks for your thoughtful comments, and glad to see some positive reactions to some of Christof's concepts. We'll continue to refine some of those. Obviously, the vision refresh is not a time for us to pick and start planning a particular, right? But we'll probably narrow some of those down as worth further evaluation. As a number of people have noted, there's now substantial new money coming to transit systems across the region, and they will be deciding. Some of that money will go to bringing back service that was cut during the pandemic, but there is money over and above old budget levels, right? Where are they going to expand into? And your timing is perfect in teeing up a couple of ideas. So I don't know exactly what our recommendations that we'll be bringing to you in October will be, but I can imagine that they will be somewhere in the realm of work with Metro Transit. I'm glad to see the enthusiasm for going west over the river, work with MVTA, hook up with, how would we take this to the next level, right? But right now what I'm hearing, again, not to prejudge October, but the vision refresh is to get away from a single linear corridor model, serve a broader set of destinations out of the corridor, particularly along the Gold Line, particularly to the west, right? And refresh the vision of connecting. The vision becomes not serving 61 only, the vision becomes connecting with those broader sets of destinations. And then the question becomes, okay, how do we take some of those concepts and move them to the next step? That will require working with Metro Transit and MVTA.
Excellent. All right. So that's October.
Fantastic. I just want to give kudos here. If it wasn't clear to you, Christof is a national leader in many things, but one of them is including drone photography in his planning process. And first of all, I just really appreciate getting that. It's not the same getting the Google Maps view of the land use. Getting that drone view really brings home some of the points. And then some of it's just pretty. So I just thought this was a beautiful shot of Hastings and appreciate that. Any other questions that we can answer for you?
How long did you have to wait to get the barge in the shop?
The number of calls I had to make to get the barge and the train to.
All right. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Christof. Thank you to your staff.
Thank you all.
Next up is communications update, Andrea.
Yes, Chair and Commissioners, I will keep it very short so we can leave on time. Since we last met, we had a slight increase on Facebook likes and following, so we're up to 411 likes and 422 followers. The other thing to note is that we've posted that engagement survey that Will mentioned at the beginning of the meeting. There is a link in the packet, and we asked the commissioners, I know a handful of you already have, but if you would consider resharing, we'd greatly appreciate that to spread the reach of that post. We've also run a Facebook ad that will end today. That is getting a lot of good traction as well. And that is the update.
Thank you. Commissioner reports. Commissioner Ortega, any update on Gold Line? It's going. It's building. If you've been down in the area, you see it. It's busy. The only thing I wanted to highlight for folks is a great Minnesota get-together. State Fair is happening starting, I believe, Thursday. Thursday, and the Cottage Grove Park and Ride will be a shuttle service again this year, so please utilize that to get out there. Go to the app and it'll tell you times and prices and pre-buy tickets and all that jazz. Anybody else have any updates? All right, next meeting is October 28th. That will be here. And seeing no further business on the agenda, we are adjourned.